think I'm going out of my head. Yes, I think I'm going out of my head. Over you, over you.
KDKA was the big radio station in Pittsburgh. It had a 17-state range. And I got on a contest there, and I became a member of this Starlets on Parade. And once a month, I go down to Pittsburgh and sing a couple songs. And sure enough, I was heard in all the states around Western Pennsylvania, New York and West Virginia, and Ohio, and Indiana. And so I started traveling farther and farther. Well, my mother went on a chance visit to California in 1950 to see a sick cousin. And my dad said, why don't you just take Anthony with you? Because we're out in Hollywood, maybe he can sing for someone. Well, sure enough, in Hollywood, California, there's a Mitchell Boys Choir. We're having auditions for young boys to replace the older boys who were leaving. Sure enough, we heard about it. I went up to Hollywood, I auditioned for Bob Mitchell, and sure enough, he chose me to be one of his newer members to come into the choir. Well, the dilemma was, we had tickets for the train 3 days later. So we had to call my dad in Pennsylvania from California, and you know, poor people didn't use the telephone back then. Well, Bob Mitchell put me on the line with my dad, and he explained the chance I had with the Mitchell Boys Choir, and my dad finally said, put my son on the phone. I got on the phone with my dad, and he said, Anthony, everyone's telling me what to do, and why don't you tell me what you want to do? And I said, Daddy, I want to sing. So that started me off in the boys' choir. Within 2 weeks, I was in the Mitchell Boys Choir on the soundstage of Warner Brothers doing On Moonlight Bay, a big movie with Doris Day and Gordon McRae. We were a big double star act at the time. So then went on from there. Within boys' choir, I stayed in there for 4 years, did about 20 motion pictures, a lot of early television shows, and I was educated enough in piano that Bob Mitchell asked me when I was leaving the boys' choir, because, you know, when you're 10, you're first boy soprano. When you're 11, your voice changes, you go to second soprano. When you're 12, you go to third soprano. And 13, you're fourth soprano. And at 14 and a half, you're out of the choir. So Bob kept me around as assistant choir director. And so all these things were happening. And in the interim, the more involved I got in the motion picture and television industry, my family decided to move to California in 1952. So that changed my whole family's life, from Western Pennsylvania to California. So after the boys' choir, I was an ugly, awkward adolescent with pimples. I wasn't a cute little choir boy anymore. So Bob asked me to be assistant choir director. And so then in the choir house, I started singing with a couple of the ex-choir boys. And this idea of a group started germinating. And so that's the origins of the Lettermen started back in the late 50s from ex-Mitchell choir boys and myself. So on from there, once the Lettermen started recording, we were not rock, and we were not folk, and we were not, modern jazz. We had that sound that was kind of in between. So it actually appealed to quite a few different demographics and styles of music, which I think was fortunate. The Beatles sing about British invasion music, we used to say, and the Beach Boys, they came to Capitol after us, both of these acts. They sing about surfing and hot rod music. Well, we got this reputation of the Lettermen, we sing backseat music. So we had a niche, and that's what stylized us, set us apart from all the other groups, romantic love ballad singers. We started experimenting when we got together in Los Angeles for various ex-choir boys and myself, and we were experimenting with a vocal group, because there was the four freshmen, there was the four aces, the four lads, and the modernaires and the high-lows, and those are all groups we emulated and we just idolized. And so with several, the hardest thing for a vocal group is to stay together. Unless you're making a success, how many days a week can you leave your wife and family and your job and get on the side and rehearse to try to, for what reason? Without seeing progress, it's difficult for guys to stay with the group. So two guys would leave a quartet, and there'd be two guys, and they'd have to find two other guys, and then, so these things start germinating. If you just had three guys, I wouldn't have to split the paycheck 4 ways, and you wouldn't have to put up with that extra personality. And so we just started doing the basic harmonies, the basic tight harmonies, and we found it paid off for us, because when a choral arranger will arrange a tenor part, if you're writing out on the treble clef, and then the lead would be on the treble clef, then the baritone would be on the bass clef when you write it out, notate music, and the bass would be below that. So these parts are usually spread only because of the staves. And there's a lot of notes in between. Middle C is in between there. So the concept most people do in arrangements, it was not conceived yet to just put everybody in the same staff, the treble staff. But you have a falsetto would take it above, and the guy with baritone could take it on the low. So we found that this, when people heard us sing, they said, "Oh my gosh, there's an overtone there," and it sounded like 4 people. Well, what the practice came, instead of keeping the guy up here on the top, when the melody went up, we'd let the top guy cross below the melody, fill in that middle gap, and then when the melody went below, we'd have the guy that was singing the low part jump above the melody. So it kept it always tight harmonies, and which causes the overtone. Because if you have 3 trumpets, or 3 anything with the same aperture, it has more of a tendency to develop those overtones. So when the Lettermen would perform these arrangements, people would scratch their head, "Wait a minute, there's got to be another guy singing backstage. They sound like 4 parts." So that was our secret, and that was our vocal arrangements were very important, and we did them ourselves. We didn't hire out to some of the great arrangers in Hollywood like a lot of the other vocal groups did. We just sat in a room with a little cassette recorder. We'd push the record button and the play button, and we'd try one line. "When I fall in love, it will be forever." Okay, rewind it, and we'd play that, and then Jimmy on the top would, "When I fall in love, it will be forever." And then Bobby would be on the low, "When I fall in love, it will be forever." So we would experiment line by line, and we do our vocal arrangements ourselves, because we had the time, and it was more work. It took several hours to even get one chorus or a verse. But we knew that every line we did was the best possible line it could be. I won't name their names, but we had, when I was before the Lettermen, in a couple of groups, we'd have these stock guys in LA, great guys, would do these arrangements for people, vocal arrangements. But I kind of thought in my mind, well, why? I'm listening to that harmony and it seems shallow. Maybe the arranger at the time had his wife call him in the studio and say, "Hey, you got to feed the kids." So he wouldn't really concentrate as much on every note and every line of that vocal arrangement like we did. We put hours and hours and hours into one vocal arrangement.
Well, my name is Donovan, and I've had a wonderful time with music, very, very lucky. I started singing as a kid like most people do, and just did it for fun, and somebody thought I could sing a solo, and I didn't know what the word was, so I asked them, and they said, "You can sing by yourself." So once I did that, I got the bug, and when I was in high school, all the shows in high school, and then I got invited to join the Roger Wagner Los Angeles Master Chorale. I was the youngest member for a couple of years, worked at the Hollywood Bowl, and I saw a few of the soloists there that, this was in 1973, they were going home from a performance at the Hollywood Bowl in a '63 Volkswagen, and I thought to myself, these are some of the greatest classical singers in the world, and they're driving a 10-year-old Volkswagen. Bob Dylan, who I don't think sings all that well, he has more limousines than he can count. I'm going to get out of classical music and go sing pop. So I went and joined a group called the Young Americans. And that was like going to college for me. We opened for everybody from Rich Little to Sammy Davis Jr. All over the country, and did television specials and things like that. That got my feet wet. And it gave me an education in what I wanted to do that wasn't offered in colleges. at that time. And how I came to meet the Lettermen was kind of interesting. I ended up in Las Vegas singing at the Dunes Hotel, which is now the Bellagio. They tore the Dunes Hotel. I'm so old, every place I've played has now either been torn down, burned down, or just fallen over from old age. But I was at the Dunes, and I had my own spot in the show. Most production singers just do numbers in the show. I was the only place on the strip where an unknown got to actually do his own spots. A 15-minute spot in a Las Vegas strip show. The Lettermen were appearing across the street at the Flamingo. I had a lot of beautiful girls in my show, and they came across to see the girls, of course, and saw me quite by mistake. And when an opening came up later, they actually called me at my house and said there was an opening. They wanted me to come out and sing with them and see if we blended. So I got in the car the next day and drove out to Los Angeles from Las Vegas. Three of us sang together, we shook hands, and that's been over 34 years ago, long story short.
All right. My background is basically more so in theater than anything. I was a drama major at Illinois Wesleyan University, and I know this is for choral directors, so I had been singing in a group that was kind of the Young Americans version of the school that I went to. And I can't even remember what the name of it was, but it was a swing choir kind of a thing. And there was a nightclub act up in Traverse City, Michigan that was holding auditions for a summer singing group at a big nightclub up in Traverse City called Dill's Old Town Saloon. And all the people that were in the swing choir other than me were music majors at Illinois Wesleyan University, and they were all classically trained and great dancers and tremendous singers. Dawn Upshaw, who was a very famous opera star, was in that group, and Andrea Huber, who was another European opera star, was in that group as well. And they kind of brought me in to be the pop singer, because that's all I wasn't trained, and so I kind of brought that flavor to the group. But I did that for a while, and that led to another choral kind of a situation. There was a group called Meadowbrook Estate at Oakland University that saw the show that I was in the summertime, and they needed someone who had more of a pop background to come in and train their kids who were classically trained to be performers and have more of the pop flavor to what they were trying to do and actually there was another Michigan group, so they were trying to copy the Young Americans, because you guys are based in Petoskey, right?
No, we're in Los Angeles.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. It was kind of the Young Americans kind of a thing for us, and so anyways, that's all to say that I was never classically trained at all. No one ever told me how to sing. My uncle takes credit for sitting me down in the corner and screaming extremely loud when I was a child with me to see who could scream louder, and that was my first voice lesson.
It's an Italian vocal lesson.
That's it. There you go, hey! But yeah, no, I never was classically trained. But it was years later, I had tried to pursue a career as an actor out in Los Angeles, and had a modicum of success doing that. I was able to be a working actor, which is all you can really ever hope for out in Los Angeles. And there was a trade paper in Los Angeles that all actors always read. It was called Backstage. Actually, back then it was Dramalog.
Right.
And I answered an ad. It said International Vocal Group. International Recording Artist seeking a vocalist. And I kind of matched what they were looking for. And so I sent in a demo, which the funny thing was, the demo that I sent in was of a show that I had done with one of those swing choirs about 7 or 8 years before that. I hadn't sung in that much time. I had no idea who I was even sending in the tape to. It didn't have the name of the group. So I sent in the tape, and it worked out perfectly because they were love songs. It was Breaking Up Is Hard to Do and songs like that. And the guys called me in, and I sang with Tony and Donovan, and shortly thereafter I wound up joining the group. It was just kind of a natural progression for us. I never really pursued a career in music. I was kind of really just following my acting lead, but it seems that the door is always open for me in the music field. So I jumped on that ship, and I've been singing with these guys on and off now since 1988.
Okay.
Say that the music industry and making music is so much more accessible now. You had to get a recording contract to go in and make a decent sounding recording of any song that you either wrote or just wanted to be a singer. And nowadays you can do endless demos that are just as good as Capitol Records in your own basement, and it's just become more accessible. There are so many more people now that are able to try their hand at writing, singing, recording than ever before, and in some ways that's wonderful. I think the public benefits from that. But for those of us who are already in the business, it's just more competition.
One of the things that I think has really changed is that actually it hasn't changed. It's kind of come, is it 180, 360? In the old days, you know, the original concept of recording was, recording a musician was to get people to come and see your concerts. You had a promotional material, it was a record, it was something you could send out, and people would listen to it and go, I want to go see those guys live. So the groups made their money on live concert performance. Well, that all really changed in the late 50s and the 60s and the 70s when the money was in the records and the millions and millions of records. The groups were, Capitol Records had some of the greatest artists of all time. And those guys were making tons of money on the records themselves. But since the advent of digital music and streaming music and Pandora and Spotify and Napster, which started it all really, and you know, of course at first it was all illegal streaming and download. It wasn't really streaming, you're just taking people's music off of their computers. But because of that, what's really changed is that now people are recording again to get people to come to their concerts and see their shows. So the music business has really become more performance oriented as opposed to whatever you can do in the studio only. I wouldn't say that that's not important anymore, but I will say that as far as the business part of it and the financial part of it and the compensation part of it goes, artists today are making as much money, if not more money, performing in live performing concert venues than they ever made in record sales. I read something the other day that Adele's tickets, her concert sales for this past year were 150 million pounds. So we're talking, you know, almost $300 million, and that's what she made off of the concert revenues. One of the things that you have to appreciate about the Lettermen was that when Letterman came into vogue, and actually at that point in the recording industry, you had songwriters, you had staff writers, and you had performers. Sinatra didn't write his own music. The Lettermen didn't write their own music. You know, they were all sort of, Nat King Cole probably wrote some of his music, but not all of it. But the point is, songwriters and performers were a different animal until the Beatles came along. And then the Beatles started performing their own material, not right off the bat, but that's kind of what they became, of course. And as well, and that just kind of changed the whole landscape of music. So all that is to say that the Lettermen, as well as many other artists, were so responsible for taking great music that wasn't just contemporary music. I mean, The Way You Look Tonight was, when was that? It was from a
1936.
1936 Fred Astaire movie. And so the group would take, and the same thing with Sinatra and some of the greatest artists of all time, they would take great songs and make them their own, and reinvent the song, and that would be through the music, through the vocal arrangement or the instrumental, the orchestral things that were happening with all of Sinatra's people and all those guys. But one of the questions that we get asked frequently is, well, they'll say, you know, we love your music so much because I just don't write them like that anymore. Well, my thing is I don't think that's true. I think there are some great writers and performers out there today. I'm fortunate because I've got 2 young children. I've got a 25-year-old son, I've got a 9-year-old daughter. So they keep me abreast of what's happening musically out there. And I've listened to all sorts of stuff that I would not have heard otherwise. Charlie Puth is somebody who's spectacular. I think his songwriting ability is spectacular. Adele, I mentioned earlier, she's magnificent. John Legend, I just think he's an amazing artist. And Ed Sheeran is probably one of my favorites today. And those are all people that I wouldn't have listened to otherwise. And they're today's artists, and they're writing the music that the kids are listening today. And the cool thing is, and Tony and I and Donovan have been talking about this, we could do what the Lettermen have always done, which is take songs by solo artists and reinvent them with 3-part harmony, and we could do it with today's music just as easily as the Lettermen did and all the other groups did way back when. A good song is a good song.
Right.
And I think great songs are still being written today. And to pigeonhole what we did, what the Lettermen did, what we do today as oldies music, all it is a sound. It's just a sound. It's that 3-part harmony, pure sound that is just as relevant today as it was 50 or 60 years ago. I think we could do a great job with some of the material that's being released today. And we've talked about it.
Yeah.
And,
Our next album.
we were talking about our next album being called They Do Write 'Em Like They Used To. Because there's some great material out there. So don't give up on the stuff that's happening. We've worked with some of the best arrangers over the years. Ed Lejeski, who I know a lot of you choral directors are familiar with. Ed was our musical director for a while. He came out on the road with us and did some great arrangements for us. But you know, his forte is choral music. And you know, his... what's the name of the company that he works for? I can't
Hal
remember.
Leonard?
Hal Leonard, right. I mean, he's been the greatest arranger for Hal Leonard ever. But he would listen to the stuff that the Lettermen are doing and go, that's how you did that. Or that's, you know, you can't teach, how do I want to say, you can't teach flavor. You can't teach feel a lot of times. And Ed, and I'm not knocking Ed because he's one of the greatest ever, he's one of my dearest friends, but you can write 3-part harmony or 4-part harmony or 8-part harmony, whatever he would do and the other people would write, but there's an intangible that happens sometimes with an untrained voice because you're not adhering to the rules, and that's a good thing. I don't know how to read music. I've been a musician, I can't even say that, I've been a singer for 45 years, and I still don't know how to read music, but I have a really good ear. So I'll hear something that maybe the trained vocalist or the trained arranger might not do because it might not be what's in the rule book of how to write something.
Right.
And I think that's something that the Lettermen did when Tony was talking about how the parts would go like this as you were, you know, arranging. To me, that's the magic of creating. You know, do something different, do something that nobody else has done, and try stuff. I mean, so now you don't even have to worry about how expensive the tape is. There is no tape. You hit the delete button, you start over again.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of digital recording to me, is that you can do it 1,000,000 times and come up with a whole new thing. And that's what some of the artists that I mentioned earlier are doing. They are reinventing the wheel. They're taking music, which has been around since day one, and making it contemporary and current and popular to the kids today, to the ears today. But you know, the reality is it's no different than what the Lettermen did. When I mean, you look, even the greats, Beethoven, and those guys were writing what was the pop music of their day. Yeah. They were looked at as rebels. You know, you can't write like that. That's not how it's done. Well, you know what? That's the great thing about being in the music business. As long as he's been in the business, as long as the Lettermen have been around, you've seen the changes. And it's that old saying, the more things change, the more they remain the same. A good song is a good song. And I hope we can do this forever and keep writing, recording new stuff, new material, in the way that the Lettermen have always done it, and make it accessible to people that might not have otherwise listened to it. Our audiences are generally a little more mature. That's a nice way of saying it. And so they're not exposed to the artists of today. They just don't listen to the Pandoras and the Spotifys and you know, everything else that's out there, iTunes, Apple Radio, Apple Music. So it's kind of become our job to re-educate our audience and say, you know what, guys, there is good stuff out there. You got to find it. You got to kind of sort through the garbage, but there's a lot of really good stuff out there. So don't give up. Don't give up, and we'll do our part if you do your part. You be ready to accept new music. We'll be ready to record new music.
Right.
Okay, we want to close and...
I couldn't top that. He had it in a nutshell.
Okay.
Except
Yes.
That just added, we've been Lettermen, this is our 56th year since our first hit record. And people look at me and say, how long are you going to do this? Well, Donovan's in his early 60s, Bobby's a couple years behind that, And they've been with the group for a long time. So I think with the added youth of these two guys during these periods, it's kept us younger overall. And I'm very optimistic that we can go as long as we want to go. And it's good living. And the satisfaction I get after a concert, we get our third standing ovation, our fourth standing ovation. And I sit back and say, we're still doing it without the value of a top 10 record at the time. It's that personal live show that they're applauding. They're playing the individual. By the way, we touched on this. The Lettermen are all three lead singers. And that's another thing about our group. When we start together in the late 50s, I found three lead singers. So often you get a lead singer that has got a style and he can't bend and he can't blend. And then there's group singers that can't carry the show. They're just good harmony people. So with the Lettermen, from the very beginning, it's been three lead singers that also have the ability to put their egos aside and sing a harmony part here and there. So that's another secret.
Thank you. Say thank you to the folks out there.
Hey everybody, thank you, and we hope that you choral directors and those of you that are in choruses will continue to learn. You're never going to stop learning, and we're glad we could be a little bit influential in some of that, and hope you come see a show sometime, but thanks for taking the time to listen to our story, however long it's been.
It's a good story, Bobby. Thank you.